Right, this is my Starlet 4EFE Turbo. I'm going to do a quick guide on how I got it to this stage and just a general sort of rundown on how I've set it up and how I've got everything working. Seems to be working fine at the minute, so I'll just sort of explain how I've got to this stage and what I've done. It's the Jap Import 100 horse model, but it had piston ring damage, so I got hold of a new bottom end off of a UK 4EFE. So it does have you probably know that the Jap 4EFE has the rods of the GT and the Glanzer, so it does have thicker rods, which would have been ideal, but now I've got the UK bottom end, it's got the same thin rods as the UK Starlet, so it's not that much of a worry, because most people that are probably watching this are going to turbo with the UK 4EFE anyway, so if anything it's a bit of a plus side. But just I'll crack it on. The first thing I did was I obviously got a wideband, so I could, when I got round to mapping it, I could use this to monitor my fuel, my air fuel ratios. That's just a boost controller, but I'm only using it as a boost gauge at the moment, just a digital boost gauge. The only difference with the JDM 4EFE is it revs to 1000 RPM, or roughly 1000 RPM higher than the UK model. I can't actually monitor that off of here, but I do monitor it on the laptop while I've been live mapping it. So I'll crack on with how I've actually mapped it. This is a ECU Master Det 3, Digital Electronic Tuner 3. I didn't know about this at all really until I spoke with someone off the forum, or he's on the Facebook pages, Richard Clark, if you don't mind me mentioning him. He's used this before, had it mapped on some Starlets, and he recommended it. It's like £130 off of eBay. It comes from Poland, and it's actually a really good ECU. It literally, all it uses is power ground, and it uses map sensor to adjust fueling. It has a map in from your sensor, then it edits the signal and it has a map out which goes back to the stock ECU, so it can tell the stock ECU to fuel more or less. That's how it works basically, and it has timing in and timing out to control obviously the timing. It's worth noting that the Det 3, it can do piggyback mode and it can do almost a semi-standalone. It's called a fuel implant technology, their standalone software. And it works like a piggyback, only you entirely take control of the fuel map. You're not just editing it or trimming it, you have to make the map from scratch, and it's fully controlled by the Det 3. I'm in piggyback mode at the moment because it requires less wires, and to be fair, the stock ECU it does most of the fueling for me and the base fueling, and all I need to do is really trim it on boost, and well, not trim it, I need to add some fuel on boost if anything, but that's the general rule of it. I just got a wiring diagram for the ECU, which I used to wire it up. This is basically the diagram that I sort of threw together. When I look at it, this is basically just the pinout of an ECU, well, the Starlet ECU, and then went on the ECU Master website, got the user manual, and just tied this up with the same pins as the pinout for the Starlet. So that's why I ended up doing that. Also used this. These are all scrunched up because, one second, that's the actual pinout to correspond with the first sheet I just showed you. I might do another video on wiring in, but it is pretty straightforward if you know what you're doing. So I'll just skip this for now, but yeah. So yeah, that's worked fine for me. It's all good. You can map it through USB there, which you just connect straight to your laptop. There's a launch control, nitrous activation, anything you want it to do really. It's a really good bit of kit. For the price of like a rev limiter or something, you get a rev limiter and a hell of a lot more. It can actually build boost. You can retard timing. You can, like on your launch control to build boost. You can do absolutely all sorts with it. Fuel implant, you can raise your rev limiter. It's just literally possibilities of it are pretty endless, to be fair. So pretty happy with that overall. Yeah, I'll strip the car out. It's basically just going to be a track car, so don't need to be anything special. It was a budget build. It owes me probably about 800 quid at the moment, all in, which is really good. So I'll show you what I've done. Exhaust real quick. I've got a side X exhaust. I just welded a hanger to the chassis. Used the rubber hanger off the back of the car. Welded the other side of the hanger to the can there. That's off of a Volkswagen Bora Beetle 1.4, 1.6 petrol, and it's actually a centre box. And it comes with that 90-degree bend, as you can see. It goes up there to the manifold. That's already on it. I had to chop it a little bit to make it fit, but that's already on the exhaust when you buy it. Euro car parts, like 20 quid, so it's all well and good. Did quick release on the bumper because I kept whipping it on and off. I was in a bit of a rush yesterday, so the cutout's absolutely terrible on the front bumper there, but it's fit for purpose, I suppose. The grill was catching with the intercooler, and it was just the last thing I was doing yesterday when I was finishing the build, so it got rushed, but I'm sure I'll sort that out at some point. As for the engine, it's a 4EFE, obviously. It's got just a random manifold that's been welded at some point, and it's running a CT9. I've piped the actuator up like that on the CT9, so it runs low boost, which is 0.4 bar. You do that by plumbing that port there to the cold side of the turbo and then putting a bolt in the other port so it's blocked. I'm running 4 EFT injectors and a 4 EFT map sensor. I was pretty surprised because before I mapped it, it actually started up and drove perfectly on the 4 EFT map sensor and injectors, so that was a bit of a bonus. A few things to check, because obviously my inlet manifold might be slightly different if you've got a UK model. I checked this is a one-way valve in the brake servo, so no boost was going to go back to there and cause you to have no brakes. There was a charcoal canister there from the fuel tank that's used to vent petrol fumes from your fuel tank back into your inlet manifold, and that pipes in. I think it was one of them too, might be wrong, but anything really is a rule of thumb that you're going to leak boost out of your inlet manifold out to other things. You need to sort of block or make sure it's got a one-way valve in it. PCV valve already has a one-way valve in it on mine. I tried blowing and sucking through it, and it does have a one-way valve, so I just left that be. This is the sensor for my boost controller boost gauge, if you were wondering what that was, but everything else is pretty standard really on it. I don't think there was anything else I had to really do to it. I ended up removing the water cooling on the throttle body there, and if it's water cooling or water, I don't know if it edits the throttle position, maybe, I don't know, from the water temperature, but I removed that because I was running throttle bodies on this car before, if anyone noticed. Noticed the car running throttle bodies on some pictures on the forums or anything. Yeah, so I've actually got to convert that back to an inlet manifold, which would be a bit of a task in itself. But for the oil feed, I went to Pertec Fluid Solutions, and I got this made up. It's a 1/8 NPT thread, which is the thread of the oil pressure sensor on there, the 4E block, and I replaced the oil pressure sensor with that. I'll probably get shot for this, but I know it's not ideal because you need your oil pressure sensor, but as you can see by the 2P I've used to weld across that boss for the lambda sensor, it's not the dearest build in the world, and I'm not too fussed about it, to be honest. I could probably put a T-piece in that line and run an oil pressure sensor, but I just don't care at the minute. So I'll just look down here, there's the oil return there is just a fitting I also got from Pertec. Took the sump off, drilled it out to the right sized hole, and just bolted that fitting on. The internal diameter of the oil drain where it meets the sump is 19mm, so it was just a 19mm push on fitting, or push in to a 19mm pipe, and then the other side was like, I think it was like a 22mm bolt or something that you just tighten up with nylon washers, and then I had resealed the sump up.
the other side of that oil feed uses I think it's a union fitting, and it tightens up. I had to hacksaw down the original oil feed to a little straight piece where you see where it goes into the silver bolt, and then I just slipped my new oil feed over and tightened it up, and it nips up to it really well. That's never leaked or anything, so that's how I managed that. And the other thing is that a lot of people take these oil feeds from the oil filter housing off of a 4EFT. They bolt that up to the 4E block or the 4EFE block, and run that instead. I found that was going to clash with my power steering pump, so I went along the lines of trying to find a smaller oil filter, because the reason you run that filter housing is because the oil filter on a 4EFE will clash with the CT9, and that's why it's like sort of moved to one side on the 4EFT. The 4EFT has a different power steering pump to sort of make room for that. But I thought the easiest way around it was just going to be to get a shorter oil filter, so I did a bit of homework. And if you find an oil filter like from Euro car parts off of a Renault 5 GT 1.4 from like the years of 1978 to 1982, it has the 3/4 inch UNF fitting, the thread in the center of the oil filter, and it actually seals up and works just fine. It's like maybe 2/3 or half of the height of the 4EFT 4EFE oil filter. So that's quite useful to know. Just make sure it is the 3/4 inch thread, because they do an M20 version of that oil filter for that car as well, and no, that's not right. So it's got to be the 3/4 inch. I think what else there is to sort of go through. I had an old Civic rad laying about off a car I was breaking. Also had the front mount kit off a car I was breaking, so I just bottled them up, so that was pretty easy. The oil pressure the fuel pressure regulator on the rail is off of a 4EFT. I don't actually know whether it's a different pressure to the 4EFE, but rather than testing it or rather than looking, I just didn't take the chance. I just put the 4EFT fuel rail on completely, just to avoid any differences. That might have been pointless. It might just be the injectors that are different, but I just sort of ruled that out. So if you are going to use a standard rail, I'll probably check that it's not different. Probably won't do anything if you're going to map it anyway. You probably just map them differences out. But if you are copying me exactly, then you could probably just use the 4EFT rail. I think that's pretty much everything. I haven't run any water cooling. That was the other sort of thing I didn't want to do. The Glanzer has a water feed coming off of the thermostat housing to water cool the turbo. I didn't use any water cooling. Again, people might say it's risky, but I just don't. I'm not really bothered by that. My TD04 never got too hot without water cooling, and it might reduce the life of the turbo possibly, but it's not going to cost me an absolute fortune or anything to get another CT9. So yeah, that's the sort of general build. If you were doing this with a UK 4EFE, all the principles would be the same. You just obviously different inlet manifold. It wouldn't rev quite as high. I've used the stock ignition system. That's just a UK distributor, UK leads, just normal plugs, nothing special, not re-gapped or anything, not different heat range, just using normal plugs. I hadn't had any like misfires on boost or anything, so I didn't feel the need to change them. As for sort of fueling, on the sort of wideband, if you were to check like your idle AFR on the normal car before you modified it, you'd probably find that the AFR might be around like, it'll be quite lean obviously because there's no load on the engine. It'll probably be around like 16, 17, something like that. When I fitted the Glanzer injectors and fired the car up, the idle AFR was like 13, which is really rich for an idle. So based on that alone, I
tweaked it back to what it should be on the map, just the entire map. I reduced that by a percentage of fuel, back to like until the wideband. I was live mapping it in the car with the laptop until the wideband read like 17 again on idle, and then I used that percentage as my correction factor for my fueling across the entire map. I'm not running a lambda sensor, as you probably saw before where I welded the penny. The reason for doing that is it removes the ability of the stock ECU to self edit fueling, because it will trim and add fuel in a little bit based on lambda. So I just didn't want it doing that on the back of my map and sort of changing things, and I'd just be playing ping pong with the stock ECU, because it'll just keep editing everything I correct. So I'm running no lambda sensor. It does cause, like, I think it's to do with that. It causes like a little hiccup on low load. Only when you're really sort of setting off in first and second, there's like a little stumble. That is either no lambda or the fact that the stock ECU is seeing readings from a 4EFT map sensor. Because the map sensor off of the 4EFE and the 4EFT are completely different, and they read out different voltages for different loads. So the stock ECU will be a bit blind as to the load really at the moment. But again, as long as you get the fueling right on the stock ECU, sorry, the Det 3, it doesn't really matter in the long run. But yeah, it's just worth noting there is that little stumble that I'm trying to work out why it's there. I might end up running 2 map sensors to try and counter that, like maybe the Glanzer map sensor for the Det 3 to use for fueling purposes, and then the stock map sensor for the stock ECU. Might run them alongside each other, but I'll probably fill you in on that on the other part of the video, which will be mapping on the ECU and how to use the software of the Det 3. But that's the sort of general gist of it. It's quite powerful, even though it's only like 6 psi. I'd probably put it. I've had like 4 of these cars now. 3 of them have been like GTs, Glanzers. I'd probably put it at like maybe 150 horse, 130, 150 horse. Feels about on par, if not a slight bit quicker than maybe a stock Glanzer, which is quite good. Obviously, the car's stripped out as well. It's quite a light car, and with it being high comp, it spools really quick. Again, I haven't got a rev gauge to show you that, but if I look on my ECU and look on like the data login or just look at it live, it starts spooling like really quick, like just over a K. You can hear it literally start whining, and then the boost is in like almost full at around like 2K, which is brilliant. Starts tailing the boost off a little bit, probably above 6K, but again, if you're running this on a UK engine, that's not even going to be a problem. So you've got like instant boost to redline, which is cool. I don't think there's much more to cover on this part of the video. The clutch is actually, yeah, the clutch is a XCD OEM replacement clutch for a 4EFE. It's actually holding out really well. Only time will tell with that, I suppose, but it's only like a 50-60 quid clutch from Euro, so that's all good. It's holding out initially. I'm pretty happy with that. I'm using the stock fuel pump. I haven't had any issues with that not being able to supply enough fuel yet. That's doing that. Yeah, the stock fuel pump, I haven't had any issues at all. As for mapping the ECU, it's just comes with the ECU. It's like a double-ended USB cable that just goes into the Det 3 device there. You can map it live. You can do all sorts with it. It's brilliant, really. I know I stressed that at the beginning of the video, but it is really good. That's pretty much everything. So yeah, you can turbo these cars then and make some decent power without spending a lot of money at all. So I'll just move on to the other part of the video, which is probably going to be the software and how to go about mapping it, and then I'll probably do some videos of the car running. But yeah, cheers for watching.